All right, everyone, get ready, because we're diving deep into atomic energy today. We've had a ton of requests to break down the Atomic Energy Act of 1954.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is. And we've got excerpts, lots of them. Chapters 1, 2, 3, then 14, 15, 16, 17, 22, even some bits from other chapters. Plus, we're going to touch on Title II, all about the U.S. Enrichment Corporation.
It sounds intimidating, but trust me, we're going to make this easy to understand. And more importantly, we'll see how it connects to our lives today and what it means for the future.
Absolutely, that's the goal. I think what blows my mind is how this act, written way back when, still has such a huge impact today. It's like electricity, medicine, national security. It's all tied to the Atomic Energy Act in some way.
It's incredible, isn't it? It's like they were looking into the future. But, it's not like they just wrote this and forgot about it. It's been updated over the years to keep up with the times.
Right, like technology changes, the world changes, so the act has had to change too. But the core idea, the heart of it, using atomic energy safely and responsibly, that's still there.
Exactly. That's the foundation.
So let's get into it. Chapter 1 is interesting. It talks about using atomic energy for good and for, well, military purposes. It's like they knew right away this stuff was powerful, almost like a crystal ball, and could be used in different ways.
Well, they weren't far off. Back then, it was just a few years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world had seen the destructive power of atomic energy firsthand. They knew they had to control this powerful new technology.
Heavy stuff.
Absolutely. And the Act reflects that. It's got this dual focus, national security, keeping us safe, and at the same time, finding ways to use atomic energy for good.
Yeah, they actually use the phrase, making the maximum contribution to the common defense and security. Pretty strong words. But again, before we get too deep, maybe we should back up a bit. I think some of us might need a little refresher on what atomic energy even means. Like, what are we actually talking about here?
Right, good point. The Act can get pretty technical, but basically, atomic energy is the energy that's released when you split an atom.
Okay, split an atom. Got it. So how is that different from an atomic weapon? They seem to use those terms kind of interchangeably, but I'm guessing there's a difference, right?
There is. Think of it this way. Atomic energy is like fire. You can use it to cook food or, heat your home, but you can also use fire to cause destruction. An atomic weapon is a device that uses atomic energy, that energy released from splitting atoms, to create a huge explosion, like the bombs in World War II.
Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Things a bit more real, too.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to that whole common defense and security
Yeah,
idea.
for sure. And then there's this term, restricted data, that keeps popping up everywhere in the Act. What's the deal with that? What are they so secretive about?
Imagine blueprints for a nuclear reactor or even a weapon falling into the wrong hands. That's the kind of thing they wanted to prevent. Restricted data is basically top secret information, but specifically related to atomic energy and anything that could be dangerous if it got out.
So, like nuclear secrets, spy movie stuff. Exactly. And the Act lays out all these rules about who can access this information, how it has to be protected, the whole 9 yards. Very need to know.
Makes sense. So we've got the what's. Now, who are the players? Who's making sure all this happens?
Well, Chapter 2 introduces us to the Atomic Energy Commission. They were the big dogs, responsible for overseeing everything related to atomic energy, from the research to safety protocols, the whole program.
So like the Atomic Energy HQ.
You got it. They had a whole team of experts making sure things ran smoothly, keeping it all under control. But it wasn't all just peaceful uses, like we talked about.
Right, right. They were thinking about both sides of it.
Absolutely. In fact, they even had a division of military application specifically to look at how atomic energy could be used for military purposes.
Wow. That's pretty intense. It feels like we often forget about that whole military aspect these days when we talk about atomic energy. So did the Act just focus on what they knew back then, or were they thinking about the future of atomic energy, like where it could go?
That's where it gets really interesting. The Act didn't just focus on the present, they were looking ahead. They pushed for research and development of new technologies, even outlined how the government would fund these projects and work with private companies to, make new discoveries.
So are you saying that some of the advancements we see today are a direct result of this act, like they laid the groundwork for it?
Exactly. Think about things like nuclear medicine, treating cancer with radiation. It's all connected. Those early decisions in the Act had a huge impact on the technologies we use today.
Wow, that's amazing. It's like they were planting seeds for a future they couldn't even fully imagine. But it wasn't all just breakthroughs and cool gadgets, was it? There had to be some rules, right?
Oh, absolutely. The act also created this incredibly detailed system for licensing and distributing atomic energy. I mean, they couldn't just let anyone build a nuclear reactor in their backyard.
Yeah, no kidding.
So they came up with this whole process, kind of like getting a driver's license, but a million times more complicated. They had to license facilities, materials, and even the people operating them. They had to prove they knew what they were doing and wouldn't put anyone in danger.
Those operators' licenses,
Yeah.
they sound pretty serious. Like, what kind of stuff did you have to know to get one of those?
We're talking specialized knowledge here. These were the folks handling incredibly powerful and potentially dangerous stuff. They had to be the best of the best, basically.
Okay, so we've covered a lot. Definitions, who's in charge, the research, the licensing. It's like this act touches on every part of atomic energy.
You're catching on. It's a pretty comprehensive document. But here's the thing. Atomic energy doesn't stop at borders, right? We're talking global impact.
Right. So how did they handle that? Sharing this knowledge with other countries, but also making sure it didn't end up in the wrong hands.
That's a great question, and it was a tough one to answer even back then. They wanted to promote peaceful uses of atomic energy around the world, things like advancements in medicine, energy, all the good stuff. But they also knew they had to be super careful about preventing the spread of nuclear weapons.
Yeah, that sounds like a delicate balancing act.
It is. And it's still something we're dealing with today. All these international agreements and debates we see about nuclear proliferation, those worries, they all stem from the principles laid out in the act.
It's wild to think decisions made decades ago are still shaping global politics today. It's not just an old piece of paper. It's still active, still affecting how we deal with this technology on a global scale. But, it wasn't just about the president and these international agreements. The act gave Congress a role in overseeing things too, right?
Yep, Congress was in the mix as well.
What did they do?
They could review and approve these agreements, and they had something called the Nuclear Proliferation Assessment Statement to help them understand the risks and benefits. Basically, it's a report to help them make informed decisions.
So it's like a checks and balances thing.
Exactly. Make sure nobody's just running off and doing whatever they want with this powerful technology. Checks and balances, accountability, the whole bit.
They really thought of everything. But this was all set up back in the 50s. The world's changed a lot since then. The act must have been updated to keep up.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's been amended, tweaked to reflect modern concerns, things like cybersecurity or terrorism, the rise of new technologies. I mean, nobody back then could have predicted all that.
It's like trying to write rules for the internet before computers even existed.
Exactly. So they've had to adapt, add new safeguards, security measures to deal with all the new threats that have popped up. It's a constant evolution.
So patching the system as we go, so to speak, it makes you wonder how they've adapted to things like cyber attacks, for example. Those are a big deal these days.
Huge. They've had to beef up security, incorporate all sorts of new measures to keep up. But there's another interesting part of the act, and it has to do with this company called the U.S. Enrichment Corporation.
Okay, what's that all about? What does a company have to do with all of this?
Well, this corporation was created to manage uranium enrichment facilities. It's a key step in creating fuel for nuclear reactors.
So they're like the fuel suppliers for the atomic energy world. That's pretty important, right?
Absolutely. And it raises all these interesting questions about the future of atomic energy, like what impact will new technologies have on how we produce fuel? And what about private companies getting more involved?
Right.
You're spot on. There's a growing trend of private companies in the nuclear industry. So how do we balance their involvement with the need for safety and security? Big questions that we're still grappling with.
Okay, so just to recap, we've covered a lot this first part. We started with definitions, talked about the dual purpose of atomic energy, peaceful uses and, military stuff. We met the Atomic Energy Commission, learned about research, development, international cooperation, even congressional oversight. And then we started thinking about how the act has been updated and the challenges it faces in the future. It's a lot to take in.
And we're just getting started. It is a lot, yeah. And speaking of a lot, there's more to the act than just setting up this whole system. It also gets into the details, the nitty-gritty of making sure everything's done right, safely, and securely. Chapter 10, which is all about licensing, really shows how much they cared about keeping things under control.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just say, hey, go use atomic energy. Got to make sure it's not going to be used for, the wrong reasons.
Absolutely. The licensing for facilities, for materials, for those operators we were talking about,
Yeah.
it's all super detailed. They wanted to make it as hard as possible for anyone with bad intentions to get their hands on anything dangerous.
It's like those movies where they're always trying to steal nuclear secrets or build a bomb in their basement.
Hollywood does love a good nuclear thriller. And, while those stories might take some liberties, they do reflect a real fear. Nuclear proliferation. And that was a big driver behind the Atomic Energy Act. They wanted to prevent that nightmare scenario, nuclear weapons spreading uncontrollably.
It's a fear that's still with us today. Every time you see a headline about nuclear tensions, it's a reminder of what's at stake.
Exactly. And that's why the parts of the Act about international cooperation are so important. It's this constant balance, working with other countries to advance science and technology, but also making sure nothing dangerous ends up in the wrong hands.
It's a tightrope walk for sure. One wrong step and... Oh. Speaking of things that could go wrong, Chapter 14 gets into safeguards information. What's that all about?
This is a really relevant part, especially today with all the talk about cybersecurity. Safeguards information is any information that, if it got out, could put nuclear facilities or materials at risk. Think of it like the secret codes to a nuclear power plant.
So it's not just about protecting the physical stuff, but also the information that could be used to target those facilities or even to, design weapons.
You got it. They were already thinking about information as a potential weapon back then. Protecting the buildings and materials wasn't enough. They had to protect the knowledge, too.
It's like a digital layer of protection on top of the physical security. And with all the cyber attacks these days, that digital layer is more important than ever.
Absolutely. And the Act set up ways to identify and protect this information, these safeguards. It's almost like they had a glimpse into the future. They saw how important data security would become.
It's pretty amazing how forward-thinking they were. But all this security talk makes me think, did they just focus on threats from outsiders? What about, people working on the inside?
That's a great question, and you're right on the money. Chapter 15 gets into all the details of personnel security. They knew that even with the toughest locks and walls, the human element could be a weakness.
Right, so it's about making sure the people working with this stuff, the people with access, are trustworthy.
Exactly. They set up strict background checks, security clearances for anyone who needed access to restricted data or worked in those sensitive areas. Think top secret clearance, but even more intense.
Sounds like something out of a spy movie. All those background checks, the interviews, must have been a pretty intense process.
It was all about minimizing risk, and making sure there weren't any bad apples in the bunch. They had to weed out anyone who might be a risk, whether it was espionage, sabotage, or even just carelessness.
Yeah, the stakes were pretty high, for sure. But didn't all this raise concerns about individual rights, privacy? How do you balance security with personal freedom?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one we're still struggling with today. How much intrusion is okay in the name of security? It's a really tough balance to strike.
It's like they opened a Pandora's box with this atomic energy thing. It has so much potential, but it also requires a whole new level of, caution, control, and it feels like we're still figuring it out.
Couldn't have said it better myself. But it wasn't just about preventing access, The Act also spelled out what would happen if someone actually broke the rules.
Oh, right. So what were the consequences? Like, what if someone mishandled nuclear material or tried to sell secrets? What would happen to them?
Chapter 22 is all about enforcement and penalties. It outlines a whole range of punishments, from fines that make your wallet weep to imprisonment for the really serious stuff.
So they weren't messing around. They wanted people to know that breaking the rules would have some serious repercussions.
Absolutely. We're not talking about jaywalking here. We're talking about atomic energy. It's incredibly powerful, and if it falls into the wrong hands, it could be devastating.
Right. So looking back, they built this whole system, this intricate machine, promoting research, regulating the industry, keeping an eye on things internationally, making sure everyone's trustworthy. It's pretty mind-blowing how much they had to consider.
It really is. And it all comes back to that dual nature of atomic energy, the potential for progress, but also the need for responsibility and caution. The Act was their attempt to navigate all of that.
And it's a journey we're still on, right?
Okay.
It feels like it's only going to get more complex as technology keeps advancing.
Yeah.
But even though they tried to cover everything, are there the parts of the Act that seem, outdated now?
That's a great question, and it's one that people are constantly debating. The world has changed a lot since 1954, so it makes sense to wonder if the Act is still up to the task.
Yeah, like we talked about nuclear proliferation, but what about nuclear terrorism? That wasn't really on their radar back then.
Exactly. The Act focuses on securing facilities and materials, but terrorist groups operate differently. We might need to rethink some things to address those kinds of threats.
And what about the role of private companies? Back then, it was mostly a government thing, but now you've got companies like SpaceX getting involved in space, which also involves nuclear technology.
Absolutely. The rise of private companies in the nuclear sector brings a whole new set of questions about regulation, oversight, who's responsible for what. It's definitely an area where the Act might need some updating.
And what about nuclear waste? The Act touches on it, but finding safe, long-term solutions for all that waste is a huge challenge.
No doubt about it. We might need to update the Act to reflect new waste management technology and address people's concerns about safety and the environment.
It feels like we've only scratched the surface here. There are so many layers to this Act and how it impacts the world.
It's a testament to the complexity of atomic energy itself, and it's a reminder that we're still learning how to use this power responsibly. It's not just about the science, it's the ethics, the politics, the global implications. It's all connected.
It's a lot to think about. Atomic energy, it really is everywhere when you stop and look around. I guess that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just some abstract idea. It's directly connected to our lives, what we do every day.
Right. It's easy to forget that the Atomic Energy Act, it's not just about bombs and treaties and all that. It has a real impact on things we totally take for granted, like flipping on a light switch.
Wait, are you saying my electricity comes from the Atomic Energy Act? How does that even work?
Well, think about it. A big chunk of our electricity comes from nuclear power plants, right? And those plants, they're built and operated under the regulations in the Act. So yeah, in a way, even your morning coffee is connected to this legislation.
Wow. Never thought about it like that. It's kind of crazy, right? Something written so long ago is still powering our homes today.
And it goes beyond just electricity. Think about medicine, all those advancements. The Act also regulates using radioactive materials in medical treatments.
Like X-rays or cancer treatment.
Exactly. The Act makes sure those procedures are done safely, effectively, protecting patients and the medical professionals too. Another example of how far its reach goes.
It's like this invisible web connecting all these things you wouldn't think are related. I'm starting to see how this one act has shaped so much of our world. But what about the future? Can it keep up with all the new technology coming out all the time?
The big question. We're on the end of some mind-blowing stuff, especially in areas like nuclear fusion, that has the potential to totally change energy production as we know it.
I've heard about fusions like the ultimate clean energy, right? The Holy Grail.
Pretty much. And as we get closer to making fusion a reality, the Atomic Energy Act, well, it's going to have to adapt. We'll need new regulations, new safety protocols, maybe even a whole new way of thinking about how we manage energy globally.
It feels like we're entering a whole new chapter in the story of atomic energy, and the Act will be right there with us, shaping how it all plays out.
Absolutely. It provides a framework for responsible innovation, and that's crucial as we explore these new frontiers. It's a legacy that will continue to guide us as we deal with all the complexities of atomic energy, especially in this century.
It really makes you think. Decisions made decades ago still have this ripple effect, shaping history and influencing our future in ways we might not even realize. It's like the story of atomic energy. It's not finished yet. We're still writing it.
Well said. And we all have a part to play in how that story unfolds. The more we understand about atomic energy, the better equipped we are to have those conversations, make those decisions about the future.
I couldn't agree more. This deep dive has been pretty eye-opening, and I bet our listeners are feeling it too. We've gone from the basics of atomic energy to all the details of the Act, its impact on everything, national security to our everyday lives. But the best part is we've started a conversation, got people thinking about the future of this powerful technology.
Exactly. And to wrap things up, we want to leave you with one final thought. The Atomic Energy Act, it's been amended over time to keep up with the changes in the world. But what about the challenges we haven't even faced yet? How will the Act need to evolve to deal with things like AI, the role of private companies in space, maybe even new uses for atomic energy that we can't even imagine right now? These are the questions we need to be asking as we move forward, as we continue to explore the power of the atom. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and are inspired to keep exploring this fascinating and constantly evolving world of atomic energy.
I would have been on top of the charts, but it's politics. You do some gimmick shit and post, you get a lot of clicks. Drop some real shit and they probably won't acknowledge it.